What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a talk show stage and finds himself under attack from a host who refuses to show basic respect? In just 47 seconds of on-air chaos, Joy Behar's condescending remarks would trigger a confrontation so explosive that it would end with Samuel L. Jackson walking off the set, leaving the entire panel speechless and the studio audience in absolute shock. The morning started like any other episode of The View. The studio lights were bright, the audience was buzzing with excitement, and Samuel L. Jackson sat down in the guest chair with that characteristic calm confidence he always carries. He was there to promote his latest film, a project he had poured his heart into. The other hosts, Whoopi Goldberg, Sunny Hostin, Sarah Haynes, and Alyssa Farah Griffin, and all seemed genuinely happy to have him there. They exchanged pleasantries, laughed at a few jokes, and the energy felt warm and welcoming. But Joy Behar had a different energy that morning. From the moment Samuel settled into his seat, there was something sharp in her eyes, something that suggested she was more interested in making headlines than having a genuine conversation. Whoopi started things off with a smile. "Samuel, it is so good to have you here. We've been looking forward to this all week." "Thank you for having me," Samuel replied, his voice smooth and gracious. "It's always good to be here with you all." Sarah Haynes leaned forward, clearly excited. "Your new movie looks incredible. Can you tell us a little bit about your character and what drew you to this role?" Samuel's face lit up. This was what he came here for, and to talk about the work he loved. "Well, it's a really complex character, you know. He's dealing with loss, with redemption, with trying to find his place in a world that's moved on without him. I connected with that struggle, that human element of wanting to be seen and heard." The audience applauded, and you could feel the genuine appreciation in the room. Sunny Hostin nodded along, clearly moved by his words. "That sounds powerful," Sunny said. "You always bring such depth to your roles." But before Samuel could respond, Joy Behar cut in with a dismissive wave of her hand. Okay, but let's talk about something more interesting. Samuel, you've been in Hollywood for how long now? 30 years? 40 years? There was something in her tone, something that made the other hosts glance at each other uncomfortably. Samuel kept his composure, though you could see a flicker of something in his eyes. "I've been working professionally for over 40 years, yes," he said evenly. Joy smirked. "Right, so you've been around the block. You've done action movies, you've done dramas, you've done all these big-budget films. But tell me honestly, at what point do you just admit you're doing it for the paycheck? I mean, how many of these movies are really about the art anymore?" The studio went quiet. Sarah Haynes looked down at her cards, clearly uncomfortable. Alyssa shifted in her seat. Whoopi's eyebrows went up, and she opened her mouth as if to redirect the conversation, but Joy kept going. "I'm just saying," Joy continued, leaning back in her chair with an air of superiority. "At a certain point, it all starts to look the same, doesn't it? Sure, big explosions, tough guy talk, collecting a big check. I'm just wondering when we're going to see you do something with real substance again." Samuel's jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. "With all due respect, Joy, I think you might want to actually watch the film before you make assumptions about what it is or isn't. This role has more depth and substance than anything I've done in years." "Oh, I'm sure you think that," Joy said with a condescending laugh. "But come on, we've all seen this before. You play the same type of character over and over. The angry guy, the tough guy, the guy who yells a lot. It's kind of become your brand, hasn't it?" Sunny Hostin jumped in, trying to salvage the situation. "Joy, I think what Samuel is trying to say is that this role is different. I've actually read some early reviews, and they're calling it one of his most nuanced performances." "Thank you, Sunny," Samuel said, his appreciation clear. But Joy wasn't finished. "Nuanced? Please. Let's be real here. Samuel, you're a great actor, don't get me wrong, but you've been coasting on your reputation for a while now. When was the last time you really challenged yourself? When was the last time you took a risk? The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Samuel's expression darkened, and even the camera operators seemed to shift uncomfortably behind their equipment. This wasn't playful banter. This wasn't even challenging journalism. This was personal, and everyone in the room could feel it. Alyssa tried to jump in, her voice diplomatic but firm. "Joy, I think that's a bit unfair. As Samuel has consistently taken on diverse roles throughout his career. Just last year alone, he did 3 completely different genres." "Thank you, Alyssa," Samuel said, his voice measured, but you could hear the strain underneath. "I appreciate someone actually paying attention to the work." Joy waved her hand dismissively again, that same gesture that seemed designed to diminish everything Samuel said. "Oh, please. Different genres doesn't mean different performances. You've got your formula, Samuel, and you stick to it. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." "No," Sonny interjected sharply. "You're not saying what everyone's thinking. You're projecting your own opinion as if it's universal truth, and that's not fair to Samuel or to the audience." Joy turned to Sonny with annoyance. "Since when can't I express my opinion on this show? Isn't that the whole point?" "There's expressing an opinion, and there's being antagonistic," Sarah added quietly, but clearly. "And right now, it feels like the latter." Samuel sat back slightly, observing the panel members now defending him, but you could see in his eyes that the damage had been done. Joy had set a tone that couldn't be easily walked back. "Look," Samuel said, his voice deeper now, carrying more weight. "I don't come on shows like this expecting everyone to love everything I do. That's not realistic. But I do expect a baseline level of professional courtesy. I expect that when someone invites me to their show, they've at least done the basic homework of watching or learning about what I'm there to discuss." Joy's face flushed. "I did my homework." "Did you?" Samuel challenged. "Because it sounds to me like you came in here with a preconceived narrative about who I am and what I do, and you're not interested in anything that contradicts that narrative. You haven't asked me one genuine question about this film. Not one." "That's because," Joy started, but Samuel held up his hand. "No, let me finish. You've made assumptions about my choices, my motivations, my commitment to my craft. And all of those assumptions are wrong. But you're not interested in being corrected, because that would mean admitting you didn't actually know what you were talking about." The audience began to murmur, some in support of Samuel, some in shock at how confrontational the exchange had become. This was live television, and it was spiraling in real time. Whoopi finally stepped in, her voice firm and authoritative. "Joy, I think we should let Samuel talk about his actual project instead of attacking his entire career." "I'm not attacking," Joy protested, throwing her hands up in mock innocence, her voice taking on that defensive tone people use when they know they've crossed a line, but refuse to admit it. "I'm just asking honest questions. Isn't that what we do here? Or are we supposed to just sit here and blow smoke about how amazing everything is? Are we supposed to pretend that every actor who walks through that door is doing groundbreaking work? Because that's not reality, and I thought this show was about keeping it real." The justification only made things worse. You could see it in the faces of everyone around the table, in the way Whoopi's mouth tightened, in the way Sarah looked down at her hands, in the way Sonny shook her head almost imperceptibly. Samuel leaned forward, his patience clearly wearing thin, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "Joy, honest questions are fine, but what you're doing right now isn't honest questioning. You're being disrespectful. You invited me here to talk about my work, and instead you're sitting here insulting me and my choices. You're questioning my integrity as an artist without having seen the work you're criticizing." "Insulting you?" Joy scoffed, her voice rising with indignation. "Oh, please, you Hollywood types are so sensitive. I'm just having a conversation. This is what talk shows are. We talk." "No," Samuel said, his voice getting stronger. You're not having a conversation. A conversation requires two people listening to each other. Don, you're just sitting there, making judgments about things you clearly know nothing about. The audience was dead silent now. You could feel the tension radiating from the stage. Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to disappear. Alyssa was frozen, her eyes wide. Whoopi sat back in her chair, watching the situation unfold with a mixture of concern and frustration. Joy's face hardened. I know plenty, Samuel. I've been doing this show for years. I've interviewed hundreds of actors, and I can tell when someone is just going through the motions. Going through the motions? Samuel's voice rose slightly, though he was still maintaining more control than most people would in his situation. You don't know anything about my process, about what I put into this role, about the months of preparation, the emotional work, the physical training. You don't know anything about it because you haven't bothered to learn. You just want to sit here and tear me down for your own entertainment. Joy leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. I think you're being overly dramatic. This is what happens on talk shows. We ask tough questions. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be here. Tough questions are fine, Samuel shot back. But there's a difference between tough questions and just being rude for no reason. You're not interested in my answers. You're interested in creating conflict. Whoopi tried again to intervene. Okay, let's all take a breath here, and... But Joy cut her off. No, Whoopi, let him finish. He clearly has something he wants to say. Samuel stood up, and the action sent a wave of shock through the studio. The audience gasped. The other hosts looked at each other in alarm. You know what? Samuel said, his voice calm but filled with an unmistakable authority. I came here today as a guest. I came here to have a respectful conversation about work that I'm proud of. But I'm not going to sit here and let you disrespect me, my craft, or my career, just so you can feel clever. Joy's mouth fell open. Are you seriously getting up right now? Yes, I am, Samuel said simply. Because I don't have to sit here and take this. You want to criticize my movies? Fine. You want to have an actual discussion about the film industry, about the challenges of choosing roles, about the balance between commercial work and artistic expression? I'm happy to have that conversation, but what you're doing isn't that. You're just being nasty. Sarah Haynes finally found her voice. Or Samuel, please, I think we can work this out. Joy, maybe we should what? Joy interrupted, her voice getting louder. Maybe we should just let every guest come on here and have complete control over the interview? That's not how this works. Samuel shook his head, a look of disappointment crossing his face. You really don't get it, do you? This isn't about control. This is about basic respect. I've been nothing but polite to you since I sat down. I answered your questions. I tried to engage, but you keep pushing, keep needling, keep trying to get a reaction. Well, congratulations. You got one. Sonny stood up, reaching out toward Samuel. Please don't go. I think we all want to hear about your film. I know I do. Samuel gave her a genuine smile. I appreciate that, Sonny. I really do. And Sarah, Alyssa, Whoopi, thank you all for trying. But I can't stay here knowing that she, he gestured toward Joy, has no intention of having a real conversation. Joy crossed her arms, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Fine. Go ahead and run away. That's very mature. Samuel paused, turning back to look at her. I'm not running away, Joy. I'm choosing not to participate in whatever game you think you're playing. There's a difference. I'm a grown man who has spent decades in this industry, and I've earned the right to be treated with dignity. If you can't provide that, then I have no reason to be here. Whoopi stood up as well, clearly torn between her role as moderator and her obvious sympathy for Samuel. Samuel, I'm sorry this happened. This isn't how we wanted this to go. I know, Whoopi, Samuel said gently. And I appreciate you trying to keep things civil, but I think it's best if I go. The audience didn't know what to do. Some people started clapping, showing their support for Samuel. Others sat in stunned silence, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Joy, realizing that the situation was spiraling out of her control, tried to backtrack. "Oh, come on, Samuel. Don't be so dramatic. Can't you take a little criticism?" Samuel stopped at the edge of the stage, his hand on the curtain that led backstage. He turned one last time, and his words came out measured and clear. "Joy, criticism is fine. I welcome it. But what you were doing wasn't criticism. It was belittling. It was dismissive. And it was designed to make me look small so you could look big. I don't need to subject myself to that. And frankly, your audience deserves better than watching a host tear down her guests for sport." With that, he walked through the curtain and disappeared backstage, leaving the panel in complete chaos. For a moment, nobody said anything. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of the uncomfortable silence. Sarah had tears in her eyes. Alyssa looked down at the table, shaking her head. Sunny's face was a mixture of anger and sadness, and Whoopi just stared at Joy with an expression that said everything without words. Finally, Joy tried to laugh it off. Well, I guess he couldn't handle the heat. But Whoopi wasn't having it. "Joy, that was out of line." "What?" Joy protested. "I was just asking questions." "No," Whoopi said firmly, her voice carrying the weight of years of experience and authority. "You were attacking him. There's a difference, and you know it." Sunny nodded, her voice tight with frustration. "She's right, Joy. That wasn't journalism. That wasn't even good television. That was just mean." Sarah wiped at her eyes. "He was so excited to be here. He talked to me before the show about how much this film means to him, about the personal connections he has to the story. And you just tore into him for no reason." Alyssa finally spoke up, her voice quiet but clear. "I think we need to acknowledge that what just happened was wrong. A guest just walked off our show because he was treated poorly. That's on us. That's on all of us for not stopping it sooner." Joy's defensive posture began to crack. You could see it in her face. The realization that she had gone too far, that she had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But pride kept her from fully admitting it. "I was just doing my job," she said weakly. "Your job is to interview guests, not interrogate them," Whoopi said. "Your job is to create interesting television, not hostile television. And your job is to respect the people who come on this show, especially when they've done nothing to disrespect you." The audience, which had been silent, suddenly erupted in applause. They were clapping for Whoopi, for her willingness to call out what had happened, for her defense of Samuel. Joy looked out at the audience, and you could see the moment when it hit her. The audience wasn't on her side. Her own co-hosts weren't on her side. She had miscalculated badly. Sarah leaned forward, addressing the camera directly. "We want to apologize to SamuelLJackson for what happened here today. He deserves better than what he received, and we hope he knows that not everyone at this table shared that approach." Sunny nodded in agreement. "Samuel, if you're watching, please know that we respect you. We respect your work, and we would love to have you back anytime to have the real conversation we should have had today." Backstage, Samuel was sitting in his dressing room, his publicist beside him, looking equally shocked by what had just transpired. Someone knocked on the door, and when Samuel opened it, Whoopi stood there. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "That should never have happened." Samuel's expression softened. "It's not your fault, Whoopi. You tried to stop it." "I should have tried harder," she said. "You didn't deserve that. Nobody deserves that." "I appreciate you saying that," Samuel replied. But I meant what I said out there. I've been in this business too long to let someone treat me that way, no matter what show it is or who the host is." Whoopi nodded. "You were right to walk. I would have done the same thing." Back on the stage, the show was trying to continue, but the energy was completely deflated. Joy sat quietly, barely participating in the remaining segments. Every time she tried to speak, You could feel the weight of what had happened hanging over her words. Sarah tried to lighten the mood by introducing the next segment, a cooking demonstration that had been planned weeks in advance. But even the chef who came out seemed to sense the tension, his usual cheerful banter falling flat in the heavy atmosphere. Sunny did her best to engage, asking questions and trying to act like everything was normal. But you could see in her eyes that she was still processing what had happened, still angry at how a guest had been treated. Alyssa jumped in when she could, trying to fill the awkward silences that kept creeping into the conversation. But no matter what anyone did, the shadow of Samuel's exit loomed over everything. During a commercial break, Whoopi turned to Joy. "We need to talk about this. Really talk about it." Joy nodded, but didn't say anything. For once, she seemed to be at a loss for words. "You hurt that man," Whoopi continued. "You hurt him. You embarrassed this show, and you put all of us in an impossible position." "I know," Joy said quietly, and for the first time all day, she sounded genuine. "Then why did you do it?" Sarah asked, her voice still emotional. "What was the point?" Joy didn't have an answer. Or maybe she did, but she couldn't bring herself to say it out loud. Maybe she had been having a bad morning. Maybe she let her own frustrations bleed into the interview. Maybe she thought she was being provocative and interesting when really she was just being cruel. Whatever the reason, it had backfired spectacularly. When the show came back from commercial, Whoopi addressed the audience directly. "Look, we're not going to pretend that what happened earlier didn't happen. We're not going to sweep it under the rug or act like it's all fine. A valued guest walked off our show today because he felt disrespected, and he was right to feel that way." The audience applauded again, appreciating Whoopi's honesty. "This show is supposed to be a place where we have tough conversations, where we disagree, where we challenge each other," Whoopi continued, "but it's also supposed to be a place of respect. And today, we fell short of that standard. I fell short of that standard by not intervening sooner and more forcefully." Sunny jumped in. "We all fell short, and we owe Samuel an apology. A real one. Not just words, but a genuine acknowledgement that what happened was wrong." Sarah nodded through her tears. "He's such a talented actor, such a kind person, and he didn't deserve any of that." All eyes turned to Joy. The moment stretched out, uncomfortable and heavy. Finally she spoke, her voice smaller than it had been all day. "I made a mistake," she said. "I pushed too hard. I was unnecessarily harsh, and I let my desire to create a moment overshadow my responsibility to be a good host. Samuel deserved better, and I'm sorry." It wasn't the most eloquent apology, and some in the audience clearly weren't satisfied with it, but it was something. It was an acknowledgement that couldn't be taken back. Alyssa added, "I think this is a learning moment for all of us, about how we treat people, about how we conduct interviews, about what line separates tough questions from personal attacks." The rest of the show limped along, with each host trying their best to bring things back to some sense of normalcy. But everyone watching knew that this episode would be remembered not for any of the planned segments, not for any of the lighthearted banter or political discussions, but for the moment when SamuelLJackson said, "Enough is enough," and walked away with his dignity intact. In the dressing room, Samuel gathered his things, and his publicist was on the phone, fielding calls from various media outlets who had somehow already heard about what happened. Samuel just shook his head, amused and frustrated in equal measure. "This wasn't how I wanted today to go," he said to no one in particular. "You did the right thing," his publicist said, covering the phone with her hand. "You stood up for yourself. That takes guts." Samuel shrugged. "It shouldn't take guts to expect basic respect. That should be the baseline." A production assistant knocked on the door, looking nervous. "Mr. Jackson, I just wanted to say that a lot of us backstage are really sorry about what happened. That wasn't right." Samuel smiled at the young woman. "Thank you. I appreciate that. For what it's worth," she continued, "I think you handled it with a lot more class than most people would have. You could have yelled, You could have made a scene, but you just stated your position and left. That was powerful. After she left, Samuel sat down on the couch and let out a long breath. He had been in countless interviews over his long career. He had dealt with difficult journalists, awkward questions, and uncomfortable moments. But this had been different. This had felt personal in a way that crossed a line. He thought about calling his wife, telling her what had happened, but he knew she would hear about it soon enough. Everyone would hear about it. That was the nature of these things. Once something went viral, once a moment became a headline, there was no controlling it. But Samuel wasn't worried about the headlines. He wasn't worried about the think pieces that would be written or the hot takes that would fill social media. He had done what felt right in the moment, what his conscience demanded. He had stood up for himself, maintained his dignity, and walked away from a situation that was only going to get worse. Back on the set, as the show wound down to its final minutes, Whoopi looked directly into the camera one more time. To everyone watching at home, I want you to know that we hear you. We see the reactions online. We understand that what happened today touched a nerve, and rightfully so. We promise to do better, to be better, and to make sure that every guest who comes on this show, no matter who they are, is treated with the respect they deserve. The show ended, the cameras stopped rolling, and the host sat in silence for a moment. The studio audience filed out, buzzing with conversation about what they had just witnessed. Some were angry, some were shocked, some were supportive of Samuel, some tried to defend Joy, but everyone had an opinion. Joy stood up slowly, gathered her things, and without saying anything to her co-hosts, walked off the stage. Whoopi, Sunny, Sarah, and Alyssa watched her go, each processing the day's events in their own way. "Well," Sarah said finally, "that was something." "That was a disaster," Sunny corrected, "and it didn't have to be." "No, it didn't," Whoopi agreed. "But it happened, and now we have to figure out how to move forward from it." Alyssa stood up, stretching. "I think the first step is making sure Samuel knows that not everyone on this panel felt that way. He needs to know that we value him and his work." The others nodded in agreement. SamuelLJackson left the building that day with his head held high. He didn't storm out in anger. He didn't slam doors or curse or make threats. He simply recognized that he was in a situation where he wasn't being respected, and he removed himself from it. That decision, that moment of standing up for himself, resonated with people far beyond that studio audience. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't really about a talk show interview gone wrong. It wasn't about celebrity drama or television ratings. It was about something much more fundamental, something that everyone could relate to. It was about knowing your worth, about refusing to be diminished, about understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away. And SamuelLJackson walked away that day with his dignity intact, his self-respect unshaken, and the respect of millions of people who watched him stand up for himself in a moment when it would have been easier to just sit there and take it. That's what made it powerful. That's what made it matter. Not the conflict itself, but the way one man chose to handle it with grace, strength, and an unwavering sense of his own value.